Well, I've got another question from a subscriber. This is one of my favorites. He asks,
Yeah.
why does the empire, the Roman Empire that is, seem to have lost their interest in their Christian creation after Trajan, even initiating persecutions under Decius and Diocletian, but then returned so dramatically under Constantine and his successors?
That's a great question. And my answer would be that Christianity and the Gospels were brought out as, and for two purposes. One is they were a legacy piece. The typology is a legacy of the Flavian Empire emperors.
Hmm.
And the other is it was a political one. It was to calm down the messianic fervor and the evangelical efforts, by the Jews who were zealots to spread their fervor through the Jews throughout the empire. So
Hmm.
they came up with the Gospels, and this was an effort. And if you look at the Christian Flavi, it was kind of a family project, that
Hmm. Yeah.
seemingly primarily in the first century. It was inside the Flavian court. They were directing, these
Hmm.
activities, the spreading of the Gospels.
Yeah.
Following the uh, the destruction of the Jewish military capacity in 133,
Hmm.
135, with the destruction of during the Bar Kokhba rebellion.
Hmm.
The Jews as a military threat was over. So that purpose of the Gospels was not necessary any longer. They had solved the problem militarily.
Hmm.
The degree of the bloodbath in the two rebellions, in the Kiddos rebellion, and then in 115, and then in the Bar Kokhba rebellion in 133, they probably depopulated. I mean, you'd have to guess, 80% of the Jewish population, and
Yeah.
probably 90% of the zealots had been murdered.
Yeah.
So they didn't represent a threat to the empire any longer. So the political purpose for the Gospels was gone. The Flavians had been replaced by another family of Caesars. And so the legacy aspect of the Gospels was no longer even something that they wanted to promote. However, Christianity had gotten started. And so it was in kind of a nascent, right, period. I mean, it's just,
Hmm.
but I think that some emperors did not want it to have any flourishing. I think primarily because they wanted the imperial cult to be the most powerful religious force, and
Yeah.
that is not monotheistic. It worships the Caesars, and the Gospels are in a way in contradiction of it.
Oh, yeah.
So this have led to various kind of negative opinions about Christianity by the emperors, but I don't think they ever actually persecuted Christians. I think that Candia Moss, in the Myth of Christian Persecutions, that book, she does a really good job showing that that's maybe mainly mythology.
Hmm.
That they really didn't. I mean, they had negative aspects toward it. I think depending on how much kind of future they saw the religion as having.
Hmm.
In other words, if they want, I mean, you can see that what's going on there is they want. Some of them wanted actually to keep the tradition of the Roman religions intact.
Yeah.
Okay, and so therefore they would have been opposed to the monotheistic aspect of Christianity. And so you have kind of a mixed bag that goes from Trajan all the way through Constantine. Of some of the Caesars were, displeased by it. Others, didn't. There was a couple who actually seemed to be fine with it,
Hmm.
but it wasn't something that Rome was actively promoting. And
Yeah.
there really isn't that much, recorded history of the bureaucracy of Christianity during this period. We don't really know
Hmm.
what was going on until Constantine. Constantine brings it about for as a state religion for only one purpose, and that is to use it as the mind control device to onset the feudal system in the Dark Ages.
Hmm. The new form of slavery.
A new form of slavery, exactly. Constantine decides that we're not going to have any more elements of Republic Rome in our empire.
Mhm.
We are going to get rid of all the political power of the people. The coloni,
Mhm.
who are this powerful group of farmers and landowners, are dissolved with just a stroke of the pen. He says they can't have to give all of their land back to Rome.
Mhm.
If they try to keep their farms, they're going to be murdered.
Mhm.
And he sets up a really brutal slave state where children can be moved from one area to another, where you can't change the occupation your father had. They try to ossify the empire in terms of the population for the purpose of control.
Mhm.
And so, in that context, Christianity makes sense because it is monotheistic. For one thing, one God makes it easier to control the population. The imperial
Yeah.
cult permitted hundreds of gods,
Oh
and
yeah. At
there
least.
wasn't really any political purpose for Constantine to keep these gods, in having any kind of connection to the public. He wanted their attention to be focused on one God, and that God was telling them to obey the magistrates.
Mhm.
See, this is I think why Constantine, was so enamored of Christianity, is that its message is obedience. Very clear. Jesus says, obey. Paul says obey. So this was the device that they used. And also, as we talked about last interview, Jesus himself was so likable.
Oh
I mean, think about
yes. The
how
humility
likable
of Christ.
the
Yes.
humility of,
Yeah.
and juxtapose that to, say, for example, the public image of Nero
Mhm.
or
Yeah.
Caligula. Been much harder, I think, to get mind control over the public if you're trying to promote Nero as the god of the church.
Neo,
You
the
see, it's
Caesar
almost,
who married a child, married a boy. He tried to marry. Isn't that correct?
yeah, he did actually, my
He was
boy.
a
Yeah,
really sick guy, which is why, of course, he wasn't deified, although he wanted to be deified.
right. Well, but the ones who are deified, I think, just didn't have their bad habits made public.
Yes, exactly.
They're it's a you can't exist as Caesar if you're not a nihilist, if you're not murderous.
Mhm.
And I think you have to be a little, well, nuts. But anyway, so Constantine looked at the character Jesus and he just said, "This is perfect." I mean, he's promoting obedience. He's so humble that he's gonna go over big in a big way with the public, and then they create the political system of the feudal era, and at the top you have the Pontiff Maximus, right, who is the Pope. He's the Vicar of Christ.
Mhm.
So it's no longer the Caesar who comes from the lineage of Nero and Caligula, but he is the Vicar of Christ. Now, he has the same title as that the Caesars
Yeah.
used, Pontiff Maximus. He lives in the same building that the
Yeah.
imperial,
Uh,
but nevertheless, the public is given the Vicar of Christ, the Pope, as their representative. He's there for them.
mhm.
He loves them. He kind of gives them comfort in their role as a slave and as a agricultural servant of the
Mhm.
Caesar. And he talks about how things are going to be better after they're dead. So
Mhm.
this was a perfect mind control device, and it worked like a
Mhm.
charm. I mean, when you think about the feudal system, how ludicrous it is, you have to ask yourself, how could it have been kept in line, in existing for
Yeah,
so long,
exactly.
50 years? It's because of Jesus. He was that successful. The humble, man God who was there for you and was going to give you your rewards eventually. And just you had to obey the magistrate because the magistrate and the Pontiff Maximus were his representatives on the planet.
Mhm.
So it's just
Exactly.
absolutely, in one level, um, stupid and well, ridiculous, but um, on another, the creation of the Christ character was so skillfully done. You
Mm-hmm.
know, his humility and his, you know, the way he's being, you know, he's persecuted and
Mm-hmm.
he's there for their sin, for the sins
Mm-hmm.
of mankind. I mean, it's a ridiculous story, but it went over, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So there, what can you say other than tragedy for the European because it put out our intellectual light.
Yeah, exactly.
The Roman Empire was on the cusp of the Industrial Revolution. We were literally on the 1 yard line.
Mm-hmm.
Every single element, architecture, mathematics, logic, technology, they had it all. They were ready to move into the Industrial Revolution, which, you know, would have created the technology for paradise on earth. But the Caesars did not want that to occur because who wants to share power? You know,
Mm, yeah,
so
exactly.
they produced Christianity, and it's a sad thing. I mean, you know, there's many sad things about Caesar Messiah, but probably the one that I am most, my heartstrings are tugged the most is when I come across a Christian who has that revelation. You know,
Mm-hmm.
they get Caesar Messiah, they go, yeah, this all makes sense, but this means that Jesus was actually used in a very evil way for evil
Mm-hmm.
purposes.
Yeah.
And that's a transition that's for someone of coming from a position of faith to a
Yeah.
position of the understanding of how Christianity was used that Caesar's Messiah reveals. Man, that's a long distance for a human spirit to travel.
Yeah. It's difficult. I mean, me personally, I never really considered myself a Christian because I never actually believed that Jesus was God, which actually led me towards this critical path. Specifically, I started out reading Bart Ehrman's book, How Jesus Became God, but then slowly moved into understanding Gnosticism, going to Roger Parvis's work, which can be found in Vridar, and then, of course, going to your work, Caesar's Messiah. That was my path. So I was never really a Christian to begin with. I never really prayed to Jesus, which is the core philosophy. Actually, that form of theology comes from the imperial cult.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
I
the
was a Christian
imperial
when I
cult.
was a kid. I was, you know, my childhood was in Japan. I went to St. Mary's Military Academy. Christianity was just a culture. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, particularly it was so isolated, you really couldn't go out into the streets and play. You know what I mean? The areas where European kids were safe were pretty finite, and
Hmm.
the St. Mary's provided that. And it was a, I mean, you know, the Christian Brothers ran the place. They had some Jesuits who worked there as teachers as well, and you know, and it worked for me.
Hmm.
I didn't, you know, just believe the narrative. You know, you're
Hmm.
like kindergarten, first grade. You know, what are you gonna, you're gonna not gonna rebel. But then as I got older, by the time I was in eighth grade, my house was in Torrance, California, and I was an altar boy. You know, because I had been trained as such at St.
Hmm.
Mary's. I was still, you know, doing the Latin Mass. And from my house, if I turned right, I would walk down the hill um, and get to St. Lawrence Martyr, where I would, you know, function as an altar boy.
Hmm.
But if I turned left, I was only like 2 blocks from the beach.
Hmm.
And this was like 19, you know, like 63, you know, at
Hmm.
62. And the beach had, it was just much more attractive to
Yeah.
me. That was how my path led to a different, you know, course. I just stopped turning right. I didn't want to
Yeah.
go there. That just seemed, you know, had no really nothing for me. Whereas the beach was surfing and
Hmm.
girls and
Yeah.
you know, music, and it was just, that was just more real and interesting to me. And that was, so there wasn't really any kind of, for me there wasn't any intellectual event or
Hmm.
process that led me out of Christianity. It was just the beach was more fun, and I just
Hmm.
stopped. I stopped turning right altogether.
Yeah. Okay. Well,